Michael Brooks, wait, much better, is the epitome of regressive leftism. Why, you may ask, is to ask yourself, what are the most prominent regressive leftists that you know about? They may include Cenk Uygur, Glenn Greenwald, Reza Aslan, C.J. Rollerman,
2,000 years later.
Jimmy Dore. But this guy is worse. I'll tell you why. You see, in order to know if someone is a regressive leftist, I use these 3 simple tests. Do they dodge questions in order to defend a minority ideology? Check. Do they deflect points in order to appease a minority ideology? Check. Do they find a way to blame everything apart from that minority ideology? Double check. Now, the definition of regressive leftist is definitely not universal. My one is pretty simple, but the one Majid Nawaz, the person who coined the term, uses is much more simpler. He says that it's someone who sides with Islamists because of Western foreign policy. And of course, there are more complex ones, however. Most liberals will agree that Michael Brooks is a regressive leftist. However, I'll go further in saying that Michael Brooks is the epitome of regressive leftism. He responded to a caller who he called a Sam Harris fan, even though that caller actually seemed quite neutral, but who cares? Now we'll use all of the points he made to show you how much of a cuck regressive leftist this guy is. And so, Michael, why don't you kick it off?
I mean, here's what Sam Harris does. And I don't want to spend too much time on this because it's kind of getting, we're probably spending a little bit too much time on him to begin with.
You're actually right. Maybe you should just shut up since you embarrass yourself every time you try to go after Sam.
What he does is he practices kind of like vaccination through writing. So he'll say, like, as an example, with one extremist, he'll say, and this is why he always whines that he's taken out of context.
Because regressive leftists like you take his quotes out of context? Of course, that can't be true since Chris Hedges and C.J. Rollerman, we're not going around the Sam Harris wants to nuke the Arab world.
And if they won't be converted, then they have to be annihilated. I mean, Sam Harris, in The End of Faith, asks us to consider a nuclear first strike on the Arab world.
Well, imagine having Sam Harris as President of the United States with access to the nuclear launch codes. That is no different to the fear of having Sarah Palin in charge of the nuclear launch codes. Wow. Has already said that would support possibly a nuclear first strike on the Arab world.
Like, come on, that would be preposterous. Why the hell is Sam Harris pointing out that's being maligned and quoted out of context? Must be because of his white privilege.
He'll say, like, it would be absolutely unthinkably horrible to nuke the Middle East. But, however, here's a thought experiment. I know this one. Right? And then on the other extreme, what he'll say is of course politics matters, of course history matters, of course all that matters. I don't ever want to talk about that, but I will acknowledge that it exists.
Thank you for mentioning or repeating the reason why he mentions how frequently he's quoted out of context. But moving to the regressive leftist strategy 1, contradictions. He said Sam says that politics and all that other stuff matters. So he is talking about that. So what's your point? And by the way, Sam's point was ever that politics, economics, geopolitical struggles don't matter. Of course they do. What his point is that on the contrary to popular beliefs among regressive leftists, religion has a set influence on jihadists, Islamists, and even conservative Muslims, in which case all these other factors are irrelevant when talking about that specific influence.
So as to get back to my main primary focus, which really is, in his case, is that, the Quran's a super bad book and it leads to super bad things. That's his main point.
A pretty good point, if I may add. I'm sure that these beautiful verses will tell people how the Quran is a super great book, which leads to super great things. I'm sure it's not bad to say that apostates should be killed, leading to nations having apostasy laws.
And it's sort of pathetically unconvincing, and it's more disturbing that people follow him, frankly.
Pretty much just leave it at that.
This is the other part of the conversation, right? There's some groups that do human rights, like I would think a group like Amnesty International. The problem, again, with someone like Harris is that he's not a human rights advocate.
doctrine and how it and how
his understanding of religious doctrine would not pass muster in any academic setting.
The second regressive leftist strategy of the non sequitur, arguably the most used tactic of the regressive left. The point Sam makes has nothing to do with whether or not he's a human rights advocate, and that's the whole purpose of his argument. Is he's bringing in this completely irrelevant factor as to why beliefs and actions and doctrine are all linked, and he's using a human rights group in order to I guess, say that just because he doesn't focus on human rights as much as he should, okay, now we can say that he's not using the right intentions and he doesn't really care about, human rights, so his opinion should not be counted. That's pure garbage.
So he's focused on using a human rights conversation to not forward human rights, but to
what? What are you trying to say? He's using the human rights abuses gay Muslims or Arabs face to not advance their human rights. He's just going out his way and literally risking his life to shed some light into the misery that these individuals face to gain what? Alright, he has a deal where he gets to eat more peanut butter and jelly. That's it. It's not to advance LGBT human rights, but so that he has more to eat during breakfast. So why is he doing it?
Demonize a particular group.
You're actually right in that he is demonizing a particular group. But of course, you're wrong in that he's not demonizing the group you're thinking of. That group is Islamists and theocrats. That's who he is demonizing, and that he should demonize, and everyone should, because they are shitty people. Now, of course, Michael will say that he's demonizing all Muslims. Now, we of course know that's not true. He's the first to defend minority Muslims, whether they be gay, female, non-believers, whatever. But he has to use a regressive tactic of to mean all of them. The idea that out of 1.5 billion people, 100% of them have to hold pernicious beliefs for them to be gross human rights violations all over the world. Which is, again, that failed to pass muster.
Yeah, he has a white man's brain.
So it becomes a white man's burden if you want to protect Middle Eastern women, gays, non-believers, etc. Let's get this clear. By attempting to make Middle Eastern societies liberal and secular, he's not going to get gold as a result. He's not a colonizer who needs to reform these backward societies. What he is a believer in liberal secular values who deeply cares about minorities within minorities.
He's supposedly a neuroscientist.
I don't know where this is going.
And I wouldn't go and write columns on neuroscience.
The ad hominem, another favorite of the regressive left. How many techniques have we covered? 3 or 4. I don't even care anymore. I just stopped counting. His point is that don't listen to Sam's points because he himself is not a theologian or a religious scholar or whatever. His points don't matter because the person is not quote unquote qualified enough to talk about that field. Now I feel as if I don't have to listen or respond to this idiot as clearly dumb point because I have someone who will undoubtedly do a better job than me. Please welcome Professor Gadsat.
Hey Bertrand Russell, you are not a theologian. Spare us your views on religion, you schmuck. Hey Einstein, shut your mouth about Israel. You know physics. You know general relativity. Stick to your area of expertise, you schmuck. Hey Sir Isaac Newton, keep your mouth shut about religion. You know calculus. Stick to your knowledge base, you moron.
He writes about topics and comments grandiosely on topics that clearly he really does not have an understanding of.
Now, Gad just clearly showed you how it is fundamentally retarded to believe that people should only stick to their, quote, field of expertise. Some people like Sam are just that gifted that they can hold credible views on numerous topics. This tactic of the ad hominem attack is only used when people are starting to lose in a debate, which he clearly is, and the regressive left in general. But one final point that I would like to mention. Michael Brooks studied European and Turkish security studies. So hey Michael, stick to security studies, you schmuck.
And then because he speaks in this very guru-like way and with this kind of seductive pseudo-sophistication, he builds a cult around him of people who mimic his every stupid utterance on social media.
A second ad hominem attack is a person who is so loved and admired. It must be that he's articulate, which is why he has this quote cult. His points have nothing to do with that. As reason, logic, validity, and viability of his points are irrelevant. Don't get me wrong, saying Sam does have a sexy voice, but I wouldn't get my views on Islam from Don LaFontaine.
And the truth, again, as I say, what he says is true is obvious, and then what he says is a problem is a real problem.
Did you just compliment Sam for his ability to identify truths and problems? Or you must just have broken the regressive left code of conduct?
There is no one in the world that would deny that, ISIS is a problem or religious fundamentalism is a challenge. The question is, how do you actually deal with it? And how do you actually figure it out? And he's got nothing.
No, actually, he has at least the initial answer. The initial answer is to first have a dialogue, and not the typical PC regressive left one where Muslims are oppressed and let's treat them with kitty gloves. No, one which is straight to the point and which speaks the truth. That is the only way in which we can hope to know how to find the solution to the extremely complex problem of the global jihadist insurgency. What Sam is doing is heroic in regards to which he's putting aside the smears from the Chomskys and the Greenwalds and using that, and he's setting the path to solve the problem of, you guessed it, is how to solve the problem.
He's using a thought experiment which leads to especially in the context of when he wrote it. He was writing it at a time in 2003, 2004 when there was, there were people inside the administration that were open to using tactical nukes as an example.
Another regressive left tactic of a red herring, where he gives a response to a completely different argument, thereby reflecting the original points. If, for example, the people who Michael was alluding to did read The End of Faith, then they'd have no reason to encourage a nuclear strike. Regardless of the fact that Sam summarized how terrible it would be to launch such a strike, he was warning us about the loss of nuclear deterrence when faced with the future jihadist organizations who, let's say, had acquired nuclear weapons. They would have no reason to read that paragraph and have material to justify against a strike against Iraq or Afghanistan.
So he's writing it in a real policy climate, and he uses this silly evasion. And then the reality is that in the real world, who has nukes that is a Muslim state that could possibly even remotely be close to this ideology that he's supposedly describing?
Precisely proving Sam's point. Hey, maybe regressive leftists are useful sometimes. And then you should all be worried about Michael because of the reasons I just gave you. The arena of regressive leftism has found their new fighter, who is just as much of a bitch as Greenwald or Hedges.